the continent of Africa would easily, in the next 20 years, be the richest continent in the world.
Africa could never attain her economic liberation.
If Africa is not united, then she will remain susceptible to manipulation by the erstwhile colonizers.
That it is impossible for a business in Malawi to trade with a business in Nigeria, but it is very easy to change your naira and your kwacha to a US dollar or euro.
We must now ask the foundational and critical question: what is the role of the diaspora?
That has got to come to an end.
Hey guys, as you're watching this video, our vision is to reach 500,000 subscribers. Hit the subscribe button, join membership to support our channel, join Patreon and PayPal. All the links are in the description. Do that to stand with us for this beautiful cause of One Africa right now. We do not forget to sign up for the petition. The link is down below. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We are here to discuss a very important topic, a topic about the African Continental Free Trade Area. For everyone who is listening today and those who are going to listen in the future, I want everyone to understand one thing, that the African Continental Free Trade Area is the best thing that has ever happened to the continent of Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a decision that was reached upon by the African heads of states in April of 2018. Let me make one thing clear to everyone that is listening. This decision was in the making for over 56 years. When our Pan-African fathers met in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the invitation of Emperor Haile Selassie, they came to discuss one thing. That was the destruction and putting to an end what has been created by the Berlin Conference, which was the dividing of Africa into the tiny little countries that we are today. They were all very clear about one thing, that as split up as we were, Africa could never attain her economic liberation. That was one of the conditions, one of the reasons why those colonizers met for 4 months, starting with November 1884 to February of 1885. They spent 4 months strategizing on how to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. Let me make that one issue clear. Let me re-emphasize and reiterate that the colonizers met for 4 months to organize themselves so they could see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. That was 136 years ago. Fast forward 2020, that agenda remains in place today. So 1963, our Pan-African fathers got together to undo the damage done by the Berlin Conference, but sadly, when they went to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, they were divided. We had the Casablanca group who were Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya. They said Africa for Africans, African Union now. But unfortunately, they were the minority. The majority were the Monrovia group who said, we are the nationalists. Let's not go too fast into this Pan-African thing. Let's go slow on it. So it is because they were the majority, they won. They came up with a compromise decision, which they called the Organization of African Unity. Every year, twice a year, the African heads of states would meet since 1963 precisely to discuss an Africa that spoke with one voice. And every year, year in and year out, for 56 years, they failed to reach a consensus until April of 2018. April of 2018, the African heads of state say the continued isolation and trading with the world stage as individual little bitty African countries equated to putting a wannabe boxer in the same boxing ring with a heavyweight boxer. That is not going to work. It was a recipe for decision, and unanimously they agreed. Better late than ever, and so it is. The African Continental Free Trade Area was born. It is such a monumental decision that is saying the boundaries that have kept us divided, they must be destroyed. That it is insanity of the highest order that Malawi has to go to the world stage and trade with the United States. That Malawi has to go to the world stage and trade with China and trade with India and trade with EU, that little bitty country. That it is impossible for a business in Malawi to trade with a business in Nigeria, because it is very difficult to change your Malawi kwacha to a Nigerian naira. But it is very easy to change your naira and your kwacha to a US dollar or euro. That has got to come to an end. If we are going to grow our economies, if we are going to address the issues of unemployment over 60% of our youth, if we are going to address the issue of access to healthcare, access to quality education, infrastructure development, we must improve our economies. The way things are today, the cost of doing business is prohibitive. The cost of doing business in any African countries goes against any ability to grow our economies. Goods coming from East Africa to go to Central Africa, my brothers and sisters, they have to go all the way from Kenya down to Cape Town, then up the West Coast, all the way to Cameroon, only to be ferried into Central Africa. It is insanity of the highest order, and it must come to an end. It is precisely what the African heads of state say we must put an end to. So it is the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was supposed to begin in July of this year, thanks to COVID, has been moved forward to sometime next year. It is a decision that is going to usher in a new era in the history of the continent. It is a decision that is saying the children of Africa must trade and move freely within their continent. Establish yourself in one country and you can spread like wildfire throughout the continent. Those non-tariff barriers that have been keeping us from trading with each other are in the process of being eliminated. The likes of Prudence are working tirelessly to see to it that the harmonization of policies is a success, that those boundaries are completely eliminated. So when we hit the road running as a united Africa that is going to the world stage as one customs union, we are a powerhouse. Herein lies the problem, my brothers and sisters. And I want you to pay attention to this particular issue very clearly, because this is where you come in as the African diaspora. The Chinese are latecomers to the continent, but they're coming in fast and furious. They have a 100-year agenda for what they would like to do in Africa, how they would like to exploit Africa, how they would like to extract as much as they can out of Africa. They have their 100-year plan, and they're just waiting, ready to move in faster and quadruple their presence in no time. The colonizers, same thing, they are ready, they've been present. What has slowed them down before was if you establish yourself in one country, it takes a long time to get yourself established just in one country. And to move to the next country, you got to start the process all over again. Well, guess what? With the African Continental Free Trade Area, that is no longer an issue. So they too have their own 100-year plan of how they intend to quadruple their presence. Let me remind some of you that the colonizers, they have been in Africa for centuries, but there has not been any development in Africa. Why? Because they were building the Africa that they wanted. The Africa that was benefiting them. The Africa that said we are only here to extract out of Africa, that the roads and railway lines that we are going to build are only going to be picking up the minerals from one country to the nearest exit point out of that country. From one forest to the nearest exit point to carry the lumber. All the extractive activities, if you follow the roads and railway lines that were built by the colonizers, they were strictly to their benefit. So the colonizers, as it is, their exploitative and extractive agenda for Africa, they too are getting ready to quadruple their presence. The reality on the ground, my fellow African diaspora, is that as we speak, there is not a single African country that has the ability to build an airport. There is not a single African country that has the ability to build a railway line. So for those of yourselves who find complaining about the African heads of states giving contract to the Chinese, guess what? If all the Chinese were to stop going to Africa to build these railway lines, to build these infrastructure developments, who is going to build them? Because you, my brothers and sisters, are sitting pretty in the United States, are sitting pretty in Europe, and you're sitting here complaining that China built the 600 megawatt plant in such and such a country, that China built such and such a railway in such and such a country. Well, let's suppose the Chinese stop making that railway. Go tell it to the grandmother who is 75 years old, has never had electricity in her life. that electricity is getting ready to come to her village, but you, the diaspora, you don't want it to happen because you don't want the Chinese to build it. Go tell it to the grandpa, 80 years old, who has never had running water, who has never had the tarred road to his village, that he can't help them because you, the diaspora, do not want the Chinese to build it. Does that even make any sense? Until you're prepared to come together, pull your financial resources together, until you're prepared to come together and have and present to the African heads of states a united front of the African diaspora who say, yes, we understand. You are giving the contract to the Chinese and the Europeans because you do not have a choice. They do not have a choice. That is the reality on the ground. You complain that you want development in Africa, but you're not prepared to do what it takes to bring that development to your Africa. My brothers and sisters, I am saying, let's stop behaving like what Albert Einstein defined as insanity. Doing the same things over and over and expecting a different result. How long are we going to continue to complain? How long are we going to continue to call for regime change? Tell me one African country that had a regime change and things have changed. You know why things don't change? I could challenge any of you to be the next president of the next African country. Let me see what change you will bring to that country. None. Why? Because the basics, the fundamental problems to do with Africa's ability to develop our economies have never been addressed. And that is precisely what the African Continental Free Trade Area is saying. AFCFTA is saying insanity no more. The only way to bring sustainable change to Africa is when Africa speaks with one voice. The only other missing ingredient that is needed for the African Continental Free Trade Area to succeed are the children of Africa in the diaspora, and that is you and I. The brain drain of many years that started over 400 years ago has never been reversed. Those who were taken as slaves out of Africa and those who left Africa in search of greener pastures, we are all sitting pretty right here in the diaspora. We're surrounded by other diaspora who understand the importance of working together. Here in the United States, ask for the voices of the Chinese diaspora loud and clear. 30 years ago, Chinese diaspora asked the question, what can we do for China? They did not ask, what can China do for us? And yet we, African diaspora, we're sitting back and expecting somehow magic to just happen in Africa on its own so we can waltz away back to the continent that is now built by who? You want quality healthcare in Africa, who is going to build it? There are more Ghanaian doctors in New York City than in Ghana. There are more Nigerian doctors in Los Angeles than in country of Nigeria. The same is true in every country, in every sector. My brothers and sisters, if you hear me for anything else, I want you to hear me for that. We are not going to magically develop healthcare in Africa. The doctors are just not there. We are not going to magically develop education in Africa. The educators are just not there. The engineers are just not there. They are here in the diaspora, and that is you and I. Ask for the voices of the Indian diaspora in this country, loud and clear. Ask for the voices of the Jews, of the Italian Americans, the German Americans, the Irish Americans, loud and clear. They stick together like super glue when it comes to their nations, to their races. The only people who are too busy running away from who they are, from their anchor, which is Africa, are the black people, no matter where you find them. And you wonder why we are the most disrespected race on earth is because we do not disrespect ourselves. Now I want you to understand one thing. We have been put to sleep. We must understand that. The only way we could continue to do the stupid, dumb thing that we do as black people is because we are still fast asleep in our slumber. How do you go to the doctor to seek medical help if you don't realize that you're sick? The self-hate, the mistrust of each other is what is killing us. That is something other races, other nationalities have been able to understand and grapple on it. It is not by surprise that Laotians come to this country with nothing, and before you know it, they own every saloon parlor from New York to Los Angeles. It's not by surprise that every motel from East Coast to West Coast here in the United States is owned by the Patels, the Indians, and they don't borrow money from anybody. They look from within. It is only us that a Chinaman can walk into our neighborhood and open a grocery store. And before you know it, the black man who has had his grocery store for decades in our community, we black people will walk right past his grocery store to go patronize a Chinaman. Now check the reverse. If a black man were to open a shop in Chinatown, not a single Chinaman would patronize them because they understand that their strength is in their unity. My brothers and sisters, I ask you one question. Why is it so difficult for us to believe in ourselves and in each other? The process of systematically brainwashing us, believing us, making us believe that everything African is bad and everything European is better, that everything black is bad and undesirable, and that everything European is better. It was all done by design. It was done over 600 years ago with the first colonizers, first settlers who came to our beloved continent. They found some amazing, powerful kingdoms that had their own religious, cultural, and educational systems. And they sought out to destroy everything they found on our continent. They copied everything they could copy. Even the English language is derived out of the Yoruba language. They realized this was a very powerful, rich continent, that if we do not strategize, there is no way we could overconquer such a powerful people. So it is the strategy they put in place was an amazing one. I have to give it to them. Today, the average black person, we don't even need to be told that you are inferior. We just know it. We don't even have to be told that you should come in through the back door. We just know it. To what end, my brothers and sisters, I ask? The world as it stands today, the world of George Floyd, is this the world that you want to leave behind for your children, for your grandchildren? I think not. How bad do things have to be, my brothers and sisters, before we can say we are now going to wake up from our slumber of over 600 years? We're some of the brightest, smartest people I know on earth. Some of the hardworking people I know, the most hardworking people I know. And yet we can't seem to come together for our sheer survival. Well, now with the African Continental Free Trade Area, my brothers and sisters, here is in a nutshell this scenario. Picture coming from the east, the Chinese are ready to pounce onto Africa. Coming from the west, the Westerners are ready to pounce onto Africa. There is a vacant seat that has your name, and it has had your name for far too long. It is only for you to move in and occupy your seat, and occupy the driver's seat that only you must occupy. If you do not occupy this seat, others will occupy it for you. Here is the sad story. A black man does not drive the development agenda for China. A black man does not drive the development agenda for the Mexicans, for the Indians, for the Japanese, for the Russians, for the Europeans. Therefore, none of those individuals, none of those nationalities must drive the development agenda for Africa. The African development agenda must be driven by the children of Africa, plain and simple. Either you accept it, take responsibility, understand that Africa is the only place that a black man, a black woman can go and be in charge. Contracts are going to be issued. Contracts for us to give black people an opportunity to build generational wealth. An opportunity that has never been given to any black people on earth. Your continent, your inheritance, your African leaders are saying, we have done our part. We have finished, or we are in the process of finishing the unfinished business of our Pan-African fathers back in 1963. The question is, are you prepared to play your part and drive the African continental agenda in collaboration with your brothers and sisters on the continent. I ask you again once more, my brothers and sisters in the diaspora, are you prepared to stand up and reclaim your position and take the reins of that train, the driver's seat of the African continental development agenda? Because if you do not, the Chinese are quite ready. The Europeans are quite ready. I have a question for you. 20 years from now, your granddaughter, your grandson will look at you and say, Grandpa, Grandma, 20 years ago, there was a problem with our beloved continent. Our continent was being exploited and looted in broad daylight. 20 years ago, there was a problem with our race. We were the most disrespected race on earth. Grandma, Grandpa, what did you do? What did you do? I hope you're prepared to answer that question. I hope you would be able to sit down your grandchildren and say, sit down, granddaughter, sit down, grandson. These were the issues in our beloved continent. These were the issues with our race. This is what we did. We came together. We pulled our financial resources together. And we went home to Africa. This is what we did. While we may not have won this fight, this is where we are. This is where we are living off. And granddaughter, grandson, this is where you pick up. And you will have to continue the struggle. Because the struggle for true African liberation depends on our financial economic liberation. Those who sought out to exploit us, you know, they're just not going to give that up easily. It ain't going to be easy. But I can tell you, my brothers and sisters, united, speaking with one voice, one mind, one spirit, one heart, and one destination, we can win this struggle. We will take our Africa to a rightful place on the world stage. Aluta continua. I thank you.
This is the journey to one Africa.
Is what Africa needs at this stage. I'm cognizant of the fact that Africa as a continent continues to punch below her weight. She punches below her weight economically. She punches below her weight politically. And she punches her weight below her weight culturally and in many ways. But the period in which we are now has been a period of introspection, one which has allowed us to examine ourselves and to ask ourselves certain foundational and uncomfortable yet necessary questions. One of which is, what is the role of the diaspora out of the African continent? The statistics that I'm going to mention may not be mathematically correct, but they serve my purpose. Right now, as I speak, I believe that there are no less than over 200 million individuals who can claim that they are aboriginally from the African continent. I can make a further claim that that particular population is a population that controls conservatively anything between 1.1 million, 1 trillion and 2 trillion United States dollars. And yet those individuals, as I speak now, contribute very minimally to the continent of Africa. You and me know that Africa, as it is presently constituted, is a continent whose GDP at the very best is about 3.4 trillion United States dollars. In other words, the 55 countries of the continent of Africa have a GDP that is lower than the GDP of Russia, or the GDP of Spain, or the GDP of the Federal Republic of Germany, or the GDP of Brazil. And there is a paradox and an irony at once. A paradox and an irony that commentators, even those with the most jaundiced of views, have said not once, not twice, but times without number, that potentially Africa is the richest continent on earth, so that the Democratic Republic of Congo, as an example, has under her belly resources in the tune of 34 trillion United States dollars. This continent is a continent that is blessed in many ways. If you look at the resources, not only the natural resources, but the human resources, it cannot be gainsaid that if we were to exploit and deploy those resources, the continent of Africa would easily, in the next 20 years, be the richest continent in the world. But that, of course, is in prospect, not in reality. We then begs the question, what is our Achilles heel? And there have been no shortage of commentators as to what our Achilles heel is. Writing in 1983, the great Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe said, with regard to his own country, Nigeria, and which can be extrapolated to the continent of Africa, that the problem of Nigeria, and by extension Africa, is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. In his argument, he will have been talking about political leadership. But one of the things that we must recognize is that political leadership, when it stumbles, then the economy stumbles, then everybody pays. And that is why I think that going forward, we must now ask the foundational and critical question, what is the role of the diaspora? And permit me a little history. Africa has long recognized that unity is critical for development. If one were to read or listen to the early ideas and thoughts of Kwame Nkrumah, for example, in Casablanca, Morocco in 1961, and even earlier in 1958 in Accra, Ghana, he said, if Africa is not united, then she will remain susceptible to manipulation by the erstwhile colonizers, whether those colonizers are the French, whether they are the Spaniards, whether they are the British, whether they are the French, whether they are the Arabs, we will be susceptible to their manipulation. And he was reminding Africans as early as 1958 and 1961 that we must deliberately make efforts to ensure that we unite and exploit our young men and women. And he was using the word young men and women deliberately at that time because the idea was to tap into that energy and into that enthusiasm. And it is riding on the crest of that enthusiasm that when African leaders, the 32 of them, met for the first time in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, on the 24th and the 25th days of May, 1963, that the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah was as passionate as he was eloquent in reminding his audience that every African had to have his or her hands on deck, and he exhorted the audience on that day that we needed to unite and to move as a united front. Of course, nobody listened to him, and we ended up with a weak organization called the Organization of African Unity, which then metamorphosed into the African Union in the year 2001, 2002. But what is critical now, the history notwithstanding, is that throughout the ages, African leaders have always recognized that if we were to realize our potential, then it matters not where we are, whether we are in the mother continent or in the diaspora, what it is that we must do. And many of you will remember, courtesy of history, the activities of Marcus Garvey in those very early days. And beyond Marcus Garvey, you'll remember the activities of individuals such as W.B. Du Bois and the many conferences that were held to bring Africans together. And the whole idea was informed by the realization that wherever we are in the world, we must work as a team. And I remember so very vividly and so very passionately the early efforts of individuals in the United States of America and even outside. And there is one speech that comes to my mind. It is the speech that was delivered in 1906 by a South African, Pixley Kaisaka Seme, a speech delivered at the University of Columbia, The Regeneration of Africa. And Pixley Kaisaka Seme told his audience on that day that if Africa was to realize our potential, it was not only critical but necessary that our sons and daughters, wherever they are geographically located, must work in tandem. And it is important to know that after he had delivered his speech in 1906 as a student, he was one of the pioneers who founded the African National Congress in South Africa in the year 1912. And one can go on and mention great Africans such as George Eman Kwejiragri of Ghana. And why I think that this history is important, because it helps us not only to locate and but to situate this conversation. And why should we locate and situate this conversation in a historical context? It is critical because it gives us the ability to identify our true political, geographical, economic, and social true north. And once again, I am convinced that this continent needs our sons and daughters. You who are in the diaspora, and I said at the very outset that you are conservatively 200 million of you, there is a contribution that you can make. The African Union has now recognized you as the 6th region of the continent. Some of our best men and women are diasporic. They are resident in Europe, in America, in Australia, and in Asia. Until now, your affinity to Africa has been romantic and sentimental. But the era of sentimentality and romanticism must now be consigned to the Museum of History. We must now be in the era of practicality and genuine and tangible and discernible and measurable contribution. We are now asking you to ask yourselves, what contributions can you make in the areas that touch our lives, in agriculture, in education, in invention and innovation, in aviation, in pharmaceutics, in medicine, and in other critical areas. I was gladdened last year when it was reported to the world that a Nigerian obstetrician and gynecologist cum surgeon became the first person on the face of the earth to perform a surgery in utero, unprecedented in the whole world. But that was happening in the United States of America, but he is a Nigerian. How could it be if that individual was in Abuja in Nigeria, or in Lagos in Nigeria, or in Bangui in Central African Republic, or in Niamey in Niger, or in Nouakchott in Mauritania? I am now suggesting to you, without fear of contradiction, that I have no doubt in my mind that going forward, we must borrow from other civilizations. You know, and I know, that until 1948, the country that we now know as Israel did not exist. It was by dint of the fiat of the United States of America through the complicity of the British that the State of Israel was created in the month of May 1948 after the dispersal, which was millennial. The Jews have a mantra amongst themselves that a dollar within the Jewish community must never leave the community until it has circulated 100 times. In Africa, we receive the dollar, and within a few minutes, the dollar is flying out. The time is now, courtesy of COVID, which is tragic, but yet there is a terrible beauty about it. The terrible beauty of COVID is that it has allowed us to introspect, to ask uncomfortable questions. And I have no doubt in my mind that we can learn from the Jewish diaspora. Some of you live in the United States of America, the country that you call the land of the free and the home of the brave. That land is a land that gives comfort to all nations and all civilizations. Yet you and me know that the Italian Americans still have affinity to Italy. The Irish Americans have affinity to Ireland. The Irish and all others, the Swedish. Why is it that you of the Negroid, and I'm using the word Negroid very deliberately, not in the sense that it was used in the 1960s, simply to describe our color. Why is it that us, the more distant we are from the mother continent, the safer we feel? The time is now for you to liberate yourself from the chains and shackles of low self-esteem, and to recognize that wherever you are, home is best. You know, for those of you who are spiritually bent, and allow me a little spirituality, particularly you of the Christian extraction. You remember, as it is recorded so very vividly in the Genesis of the Bible, that there is a man called Joseph. And that man, when he was about to be gathered to his fathers, and he knew by dint of divine prognostication that he would die, he said unto his people that when you are free from this land, take my bones and cause it to be buried in my fatherland. You who are out there in the United States of America, in Europe, or other parts of the world, there is a sense in which, speaking metaphorically, you must now come home. And this is the last point that I want to make. That Africa now has structures. I remember so very vividly in 1980, African countries gathered in Lagos, Nigeria, and came up with the Lagos Plan of Action. The Lagos Plan of Action was designed to improve intra-African trade. But even before that, in 1975, under the Lomé Convention, the Lomé Convention was an arrangement between Africa, Pacific, and the European Union to improve trade within Africa. After Lomé Convention went through the course, there was the Cotonou Agreement in the year 2000. And of course, we ended up with the Lagos Plan of Action. The Lagos Plan of Action, nothing happened under the Lagos Plan of Action. After the Lagos Plan of Action, we have had other engagements. We have had the Abuja Agreement, we have had the Yamoussoukro Agreement, we have had the Maputo Agreement, we have had numerous agreements now culminating in Africa Agenda 2063. And Africa Agenda 2063, which is founded on the 7 pillars that you are aware about, which must be read together with the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them. And I want to remind you of the first 2 goals, the elimination of hunger and poverty. And the promises of those instruments have now congealed, as it were, into the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which ought to have taken effect actually on the first day of July this year, but has been postponed because of COVID and will now take effect in the month of January. I'm aware that some of the participants here are very intimately involved with ACTFA. So what can the diaspora do in the context of that history? And I think there are many things that you can do. And I can see that my very good friend, Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao, is present in this assembly, and many others. The African Diaspora Institute, what are we thinking about doing? And I'm saying that going forward, we want you to cast your lot with the continent of Africa, not sentimentally, not romantically, but practically. So we want to see you in the banking sector. You know, about a month ago, when the United States of America, in its usual arrogance, wanted to torpedo the appointment of Dr. Akinwumi Adesina as the director of the African Development Bank, I prayed to the gods and they listened. He's now been cleared. Why should the Irish and the Japanese and the Americans invest in the African Development Bank? Why can't the diaspora invest in the African Development Bank? Can we not? Let us go into the area of agriculture. Who is propagating our seeds? It is Monsanto. If somebody is responsible for propagating the seeds that you grow to feed yourselves? Are you safe? How have they been genetically manipulated? Can't you invest in agriculture? Can't we invest in pharmaceuticals? Why is it that it is Johnson and Johnson and Roche that we should have in this environment? Can't we invest in that area? We are not now talking about innovation and invention, and we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution and robotics and all other, the Internet of Things and 5G. Why are we talking about Huawei? Why are we not talking about African initiatives? Can't you invest in that area? And there are many areas in which you can invest. If there was ever a time when there was a need to come together, this is the time. And I'll conclude by making reference to a sermon that was delivered by Martin Luther King Jr. just before he died. The last sermon that he delivered in Atlanta, Georgia, at Ebenezer Church. And he reminded his audience about a man called Rip Van Winkle, who history records had slept for 20 years. Rip Van Winkle started sleeping when King George, the King of England, was also the King of the United States of America. When he woke up, he discovered that there had been a revolution, and that revolution had led to the American Declaration of Independence, which you know in 1776, the opening words of which are, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are born equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Those words are universally applicable, but the point I wanted to make is what Martin made on that day, that when Rip woke up, George was no more, Washington was. He had slept through a revolution. We Africans, are we going to sleep through a revolution again? Or we are awake that we may earn the dividends that have been brought to us courtesy of COVID-19, which has allowed us to introspect. I have no doubt in my mind that it can be done. And I want to conclude with the words of the man whom I admire, Julius Kambarage Nyerere. He said, "It can be done. Let us play our part." Indeed, it can be done. Let us play our part. The diaspora has a role to play, and a fundamental role.